Across the bottomless pit. Franklin Gorin wanted to see Stephen's discovery for himself. It had been a long time since anything new was found inside Mammoth. On September 5th, 1838, he told Stephen to lead the way back into the cave. Archibald Miller and George Tapscott, the carpenter, came along as well. Stephen had told them about the slippery climb up the slope, so the men brought a wooden ladder along. They also brought a length of strong rope. When they reached the labyrinth, Stephen started forward. Behind him, the others hesitated as they looked at the confusing maze of passages. Then Stephen showed them his arrow markings. "Very smart, Stephen," Gorin said. He seemed very pleased. The men carried the ladder to the steep wall that Stephen had worked so hard to climb. Now it was easy to reach the new level. Gorin and others gazed into the window for a look at the new shaft. Archibald Miller had brought some balls of oil-soaked cotton. He lit one and threw it into the pit. As the burning cotton drifted slowly downward, the glowing flame revealed even more beautiful details of the shaft. Down, down it fell, until it had a pool of water at the bottom. "I'd guess 60, 70 feet deep," Miller said, "and look how high up it goes. It's beautiful. I'm calling it Gorin's Dome," the cave's owner said proudly. It wasn't fair, Stephen thought to himself. Everyone would believe that Mr. Gorin had made the discovery. There was nothing Stephen could do about it. Mr. Gorin owned the cave, and Mr. Gorin owned him. So Stephen kept quiet. The four men ventured on. They found a second window overlooking the beautiful shaft. Beyond that, the passageway seemed to hit a dead end. Hanging from the roof of the cave was a beautiful stone curtain, so wide that it walled off the pathway. The men paused to regard it. By now, Stephen had learned that the stalactites were formed by water dripping down from the surface above the cave. The water dissolved the rock bit by bit. Over hundreds and thousands of years, the dripping water formed stalactites, draperies, and other formations from the dissolved rock. "Think how long it took to make this," Gorin said, pointing to the formation blocking their way. "If you ask me, that's been building since the time of Noah's Ark." Stephen was moving his lantern up and down, looking closely at the curtain of rock. Now he saw something. Along the left-hand wall, the formation did not reach all the way to the floor. Stephen got down on his hands and knees. He could see a crack with just enough room to crawl through. "Mr. Gorin," he said, "there's a way through here. I'm going in." Archibald Miller came too. The rough stones scraped their shoulders, but they made it past the stone curtain. The passage continued in front of them. After some grunting and squeezing, the other men joined them. "I had no idea all of this was here," Gorin said. "This cave is more than I bargained for." The men made many more discoveries that day. They found several small domes decorated with beautiful orange and white formations. They found a wide passageway with pure white walls and ceiling. To mark the occasion, Mr. Gorin wrote his name in the cave. He used the smoke from his lantern to make a dark smudge on the rock ceiling. Then he scratched, "F. Gorin, September 5th, 1838. Mr. Gorin wrote something else too. It was a letter to the newspaper in Louisville, the nearest big city in Kentucky, telling about the new discoveries. After it was published, many more visitors started coming to the cave. Stephen was busy. His tours lasted longer now that there were more trails to show. Stairs were built to allow visitors to reach Gorin's Dome. Stephen kept exploring until he knew the new tunnels as well as the old ones. Only the bottomless pit stopped him. One day that fall, Stephen led a group through the cave. One of the men who paid for the tour was H.C. Stevenson from Georgetown, Kentucky. Stevenson seemed very interested in the cave. Even before they reached the entrance, he started asking questions. Stephen didn't mind. He loved to talk about Mammoth. He showed his customers as much as he could that day, but Stephen wanted to see even more. The next day, he paid extra for Stephen to lead him on a private tour. He wanted to see things beyond the usual trails, so Stephen took him to places that were hard to reach. Stevenson was young and healthy and able to squeeze under low ceilings and climb up steep slopes. Stephen showed him a place called the Solitary Cave, which could be reached only by crawling for a long distance. Then the men made their way through the labyrinth. Stephen held the lantern while his customer viewed Gorin's dome. "Like nothing I've ever seen," Stevenson said in admiration. "I'll warrant even the caves in Europe are not so beautiful." He wanted to see everything, every strange formation and crack in the wall. Stephen was enjoying himself. Stevenson was the first person who seemed as excited as he was about the cave. Now Stephen took Stevenson to the edge of the bottomless pit. Stephen threw down a burning scrap of paper to demonstrate how deep it was. Slowly the paper fell, twisting and turning as it burned, until it was lost in total darkness. No bottom could be seen. Stevenson whistled. Then he pointed across the pit to the passageway on the other side. "Have you thought about getting over there?" All of a sudden, Stephen's stomach felt knotted up. Yes, of course he thought about it, but until now there had been nobody to join in his plan. "I can't do it by myself," he told Stevenson, "but if there are two of us, we could use the ladder." Ever since stairs were built so that people could reach Gorin's dome, the ladder Stephen and the others had used was not needed. Stephen dragged it to the edge of the pit. He knew it was long enough to reach across the frightening gap, but he had been afraid that the ladder would slip while he crawled across. With nobody to hold it steady, it might dump him into the darkness. Stevenson set down his lantern and scratched his head, looking back and forth from the ladder to the opening. Would this stranger help him? Stephen was breathless. He realized that he had been waiting a long time for this. "I want to cross too," Stevenson decided. "I'll hold the ladder for you, then you do the same for me." Stephen nodded eagerly. They took the ladder at the edge of the bottomless pit. Carefully, they lowered it until the other end touched the far side. But as soon as Stephen crawled onto the first rung, the ladder teetered. Stevenson knelt immediately to brace the ladder. He leaned his weight onto it to hold it down firmly. Stephen could feel the difference. He and Stevenson looked at each other. Were they crazy to be trying this? Stephen didn't think so. This was the most exciting thing that had ever happened to him. He could see the same excitement in Mr. Stevenson's eyes. Now Stephen had to figure out how to take his lamp. Without light, they wouldn't be able to see on the other side, but he needed both hands to hold onto the ladder. How could he take the oil lamp, too? "I've got an idea," Stevenson said. He reached inside his coat. From his vest pocket, he pulled a clean white handkerchief. He wrapped it tightly around the metal handle of the lamp. "Can you carry it in your teeth?" he asked Stephen. Stephen gave it a try. He gripped the handkerchief tightly around the handle. At the same time, he had to be careful not to let the lamp touch his chest because it was hot and would burn him. He crawled onto the ladder with the lamp dangling under his chin. It was very heavy, and he knew his neck would hurt later, but he didn't care. Stephen took a deep breath. Then he inched out over the pit. He did not look down. Instead, he fixed his eyes on the new passageway. He would be the first person ever to set foot in it. Surely the old Indians never got this far. The ladder rocked very gently as Stephen scooted forward. He moved as quickly as he could. He didn't want to be on this rickety bridge very long. Closer, closer, he was there. He let the lantern clang onto the rocky floor and jumped to his feet. He couldn't help himself. He threw his arms up in the air and yelled. Stevenson was clapping. "Good work," he said. Stephen looked back to see the white man still kneeling in the dirt. Then he turned and looked into the new tunnel. The path rose gently and went over a small hill. Stephen couldn't see any more from where he stood. "My turn now," said Stevenson. "Hold the ladder." Stephen remembered that he was on the job. Mr. Stevenson had paid for a private tour. How much farther would he want to go? Stephen would be happy to explore all day. Stephen knelt onto his end of the ladder. Stevenson checked very carefully on his side to make sure the legs would stay in place. They would be in deep, deep trouble if their ladder fell into the bottomless pit. Stevenson readied his own ladder and prepared to crawl. Then he made a mistake. He looked down into the pit. Immediately, Stephen could see fear come into the other man's face. Stevenson's forehead was showing beads of sweat, and his hands were shaking on the ladder.